All right, so I want to talk a little bit about my experience with going through a Mormon temple. Specifically, I'm going to talk about kind of the expectation that was set up from a young age, what my experience was like the first few times I went, and how I kind of eventually lost my faith in temple worship overall. So I grew up northern Utah. My parents were LDS, so I was a child of the covenant. Baptized at 8, grew up in church culture, Boy Scouts, young men's, attended seminary, uh, served a mission, all that stuff. The typical path that you would expect from a Mormon boy, basically. Uh, but I think the point that I really want to get to here is that the decision to attend the temple isn't just a spur of the moment choice that you make. You don't just wake up one day and say, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go through the temple. At least not in my experience. In my experience, it was born into the church, start attending primary, and then all throughout primary, you're being told you're going to get baptized, you're going to get the Aaronic priesthood, you're going to get the Melchizedek priesthood, you're going to go through the temple. And that's what you hear for the first, few years of your life, from sunbeams when you're, I don't know how old you're, 3, you know, up until you're baptized at 8. You're going to get baptized, you're going to get the priesthood, you're going to go through the temple, you're going to get baptized, you're going to get the priesthood, you're going to go through the temple. It's repeated, you know, all throughout primary. And so the day comes, I get baptized. And the next step from that is, congratulations, you've been baptized. Your next steps are, you're going to get the priesthood, you're going to get the Aaronic priesthood, you're going to get the Melchizedek priesthood, you're going to go through the temple. And I remember distinctly, so I was baptized in February, so northern Utah, a lot of snow on the ground. I remember we went for a drive. We went up to the Logan Temple, and I still have the picture somewhere. Um, but I put on my winter coat because it's freezing out there. It was February, and it was green on the top, black on the bottom. I was holding my beanie, and my mom took a picture of me in front of the Logan Temple. We printed it out and we put it in a picture frame. And next to my picture in the frame were the words from the primary song. Um, I love to see the temple. It had, some of the verse in there. And this picture was up on my wall from the moment I was 8 years old to until it ended up on a box somewhere after my mission when, I moved out of my parents' house. And so, that this expectation that you were going to go through the temple and make covenants with God was there from the beginning. And so when I eventually got old enough to decide to attend the temple, it didn't really feel like it was much of a choice. And I think the only way that I can explain that is that it felt to me like as much of a choice as, say, dropping out of high school, right? Like, some people have no problem dropping out of high school, deciding not to serve a mission. But to me, it was just the next step in life. There was an expectation that I was going to graduate high school, go through the temple, go on my mission. Deviating from that, I knew it was a choice, but it didn't really feel like it was much of a choice, if you kind of catch what I'm saying there. Okay, so going through the temple. Um, Now, speaking to my own personal experience, obviously, when I first went through the temple, I actually really enjoyed it, if I'm being completely honest with you. I didn't really understand what was going on, which was probably why I enjoyed it. And I think the only way that I can really explain was the reason why I enjoyed it was, you need to realize that in the Mormon church, we're not a very our worship is very Protestant. Our hymns are very slow. They're very boring. Um, there's really not very much religious aspect to the religion. Compared to, say, you attend a Catholic mass. Um, there's no robes, there's no symbols, there's other than, like, the bread and the water for the sacrament, which even by themselves is kind of bland, right? White bread and a cup of water. There's not much visually going on symbolic wise in the church, if any of that made any sense. And so when you attend the temple, you know I was wearing specific clothing. I was wearing a robe, I was wearing an apron, I was wearing a hat. um there was an altar, there was praying, there was the veil. There's all sorts of things where it's like, this is symbolic, this is clearly, this is religion. That this is something that had been missing my entire religious experience, was all these physical aspects of religion that I saw in other churches. And so to me, that's what I liked about the temple. I liked that there was stuff in there where it was like, if I can dig into the symbolism of this, then there's more for me to understand. There was more to the church, and to me that was really important. I like to dig into things. I like to learn new things, and so the temple gave me stuff to think about and symbolism to try and understand. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't until I started attending frequently. This was mostly on my mission. I was in Spokane, Washington. I was pretty close to the Spokane temple, and we were encouraged to attend as frequently as we can. I don't remember what the schedule was like, but we had a set amount of times that we were allowed to go. As I continued to go, the novelty of it all started to fall apart. It didn't feel as new and exciting, which I began to realize that was the only real reason I actually enjoyed it. Because if you're familiar with the temple ceremony itself, you weren't really learning anything new. Um, I'm aware that there's symbolism there, and there's always something you can dive into to try and understand. But for the most part, I started to recognize, like, I feel like this is more about just keeping me devoted to the church than it is about growing myself spiritually. That was the perception that I got. And there are a couple things about the ceremony. I'm not going to get too detailed in it. I'm aware I have LDS followers, but one of the main ones was in the temple video in the script. Lucifer himself is portrayed in the temple, and he turns to the camera and he looks right at you and he tells you that if you do not live up to the covenants that you're making, you're going to be in his power. And that started to not really sit right with me. It felt forced, to be honest. It kind of felt like I don't need. It felt like, do I really need a direct threat from the adversary to convince me to keep coming and to convince me to keep the covenants? And so it didn't fit. It felt manipulative. And every single time I went, I dreaded that line coming up because nothing about the temple ceremony really seemed like that was necessary. The only reason I could think that would be in there was this is supposed to make you feel afraid of backing down. Another part of it, one of the covenants you make is to give all of your time, talents, and abilities to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's not about God. It was about the church. And I know that people can argue, well, if you're giving all your devotion to the church, then you're giving it to God. So why not just covenant to give everything to God? Because then that could be flipped, right? If you're giving everything to God, that means you're giving it to the church. So those two things were two main ones, and I know a lot of people have issues with those two. Is a direct threat from Satan, and being told that you were promising to give everything to the church. And so I began to realize that temple attendance was less about a conversion to the gospel and more about keeping you in line with the expectations of the church, primarily from the fact that one of the covenants is that you're going to give all of your time, talents, and abilities to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but also from a few of the temple recommend questions themselves. Remember, being temple worthy is one of the things that is pushed in almost every Sunday school lesson, every sacrament meeting, every general conference especially, and you hear it over and over and over again, is you need to have a temple recommend. You have to strive to remain to be temple worthy. But what does it mean to be temple worthy? Well, we can get that by looking at the temple recommend interview questions. And I'm not going to read all of them. I'm just going to read the ones that are relevant to the point that I'm trying to make, being that temple attendance is more about keeping you devoted to the church and less about keeping you devoted to Jesus Christ or God or even the gospel in general. For example, this question is, do you sustain the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as the prophet, seer, and revelator, and as the only person on earth authorized to exercise all priesthood keys? Do you sustain the members of the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles as prophets, seers, and revelators? Do you sustain the other general authorities and local leaders of the church? Now remember, if you say no, You are not worthy of going into the temple. This is a worthiness interview. So if you say no, I do not believe that you are a prophet of God, you're not worthy of going to the temple and making promises with God. It's contingent on that. Okay, and then this question: do you support or promote any teachings, practices, or doctrines contrary to those of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Again, this is showing your devotion to the church. Are you a full tithe payer? Do you give 10% of your money to the church? Do you keep the covenants that you made in the temple, including wearing the temple garment as instructed in the endowment? Okay, so garment aside, do you keep the covenants you made in the temple? One of them being, do you give all of your time, talents, and abilities to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? So the way that God determines your worthiness of receiving his blessings is by showing how devoted you are to his church. It's not about how much faith you have in Jesus Christ. It's not about do you do good things in your life. It's are you devoted to the church? And that just doesn't sit right with me. Because to me, religion is always about you and God. It's not about you and the church. Okay, so those are some of my thoughts. Obviously, it might not be as articulate as I would have liked it to be. Um, but the temple experience is so complex for each individual. You know, some people are turned away by the actual practices of the temple. Some people are turned away um, by the things that I liked, the symbolism, the rituals, the clothing, where other people are drawn to it, like myself. And losing faith in the entire process of the temple varies person to person. And some of us are probably not as articulate at expressing those reasons as other people. But I just kind of want to throw that out there, that it wasn't necessarily that I was weirded out by it. It wasn't that I was like, oh my gosh, this is a cult. It was more of the slowly over time recognizing that there was a certain level of emotional manipulation that was happening there, and realizing that I, quite frankly, just wasn't okay with it, and that I disagreed with the overall intentions that I was kind of picking up on. So I would love to hear, if you have any kind of experience with the temple that you would like to share. You know, go ahead, drop it in the comments. You know, please subscribe, like this, and just share your thoughts.